Welcome. My name is David Kim, and I'm the Executive Director of the Center for Faith and Work, and we're glad that you're here. We usually start right on time, but we wanted to ease into tonight's talk, given the topic, just so for you to relax a little bit. A lot of you are coming straight out of work. But I think this topic for a lot of us today is really poignant, given where we are as a society and the unrest that a lot of us feel. And the question of Sabbath, and I don't know for many of you, I grew up in a context, in a conservative home where the idea of Sabbath was at least ritually held. But it wasn't really till college that I began to understand that the Sabbath is much more than just religious observance. It actually begins to raise much larger questions of our humanity and this larger question of who am I in the context of this world that I live in. And it came in a very personal way that during my freshman year, I remember one of the seniors approached me and said, you're a Christian. Do you observe Sabbath? And I said, I kind of do, and just thought about kind of the way I was brought up. But then he asked me the question, do you study on Sundays? And I said, yeah, a lot of my tests are on Monday, so why wouldn't I study? And he challenged me. He's like, well, when you write on your form, occupation, what do you write? And I say, student. And what is it, the work of the student? And then, okay, you made your point. And I remember thinking it was just a little bit crazy to give up prime study time and feeling like I would get behind compared to my peers. And my freshman year didn't go as I had planned. And my second year, I decided maybe the Sabbath thing, I should give it a try. And strangely enough, I decided very religiously began to observe Sabbath. And if they were to do a study on the impact of the Sabbath, I would be one of those statistics that said it made a clear difference in my academic performance. And it became a little bit clearer to me, more than having my GPA go up. It was a larger question of forcing me every Sunday to think about what ultimately am I living for? Who am I trusting in? And it began to raise those larger questions, and the actual practice of Sabbath, where it begins to interfere into your life and your own sense of control, forces you to consider the larger kind of religious questions of who is in control then. And Judith, our speaker tonight, presents this beautifully in the introduction of her book. Actually, this is in the first chapter entitled Time Sickness, and let me just read you a part of this, and she's referring to the Talmud, which is a critical rabbinic text, and the Talmud asks this question: what if a person is traveling in the desert and forgets which day is Shabbat, and there's no one around to tell him? The answer takes the form of a dispute, as do all answers in the Talmud. One rabbi says the man should count 6 days from the last he first realizes he doesn't know what day it is, then keep the seventh as the Sabbath. Another rabbi says, no, he should keep the Sabbath on the very next day, then count six more before he keeps it again. Missing from this bizarrely numerical discussion is any acknowledgement of the desperation of someone in that situation. How lost do you have to be to forget which day it is? And I love that question because it's so apropos to where we are in our society and kind of where a lot of us feel, how lost are we today? Not just as individuals, but as a society, as a culture, as people living in our world today. And so I think what we're going to hear tonight will hopefully impact in a very real way the way you live your life, the way you think about the larger questions of who's really in control. But also as we think about the way that we want to shape the community around us, the society we live in. And so it's a real pleasure for me to be able to invite two speakers today. The first will be Judith Shulevitz, and let me first give you her bio, and then I'm going to talk about Lolita and then invite both of them to come up. And just by way of the agenda for tonight, we're going to have Judith come up first, and then Lolita's going to share a little bit of her own journey in this kind of Sabbath question, and then we'll end this evening with a trialogue between the three of us, where we're going to be asking each other questions first, and then we're going to open up the floor for you guys to ask any questions that come up in the context of what you're hearing tonight. Judith Shulevitz became a contributing opinion writer for the New York Times in the spring of 2015. An editor, critic, and journalist, she studied French literature at Yale. Most recently, she was the senior editor at The New Republic. She was previously the editor of Lingua Franca, a magazine about the academy and ideas, the culture editor of Slate, and the deputy editor of New York Magazine. From 2001 to 2003, she wrote a bi-weekly column for the New York Times Book Review. Her book, The Sabbath World, which is available over there at the end, Glimpses of a Different Order of Time, is an opinionated, in the good sense of the word, history of one of the most important ideas in Western religious thought, that to thrive, societies must designate set times in which work stops and the rest of life occurs. The book was one of the Times 100 notable books of 2010 and one of the Forward's top 5, was a finalist in the National Jewish Book Award, and was awarded a medal by the American Library Association. Followed by Judith will come Lolita Jackson, and Lolita currently serves as the special advisor to the Senior Director of Climate Policy and Programs in the New York City's Mayor's Office. She administers activities for New York City's participation in global climate and resilience networks, and is as New York City's liaison to all foreign and domestic governments in the area of climate. Lolita is part of the team responsible for One NYC, New York's overall resilience plan. Prior to her appointment to this role, she held numerous positions within the mayor's office. Immediately after Hurricane Sandy, she was named to the management team of the Special Initiative for Rebuilding and Resiliency and was named Director of External Affairs of the Housing Recovery Office. Prior to her career in government, Ms. Jackson was also the Vice President for Morgan Stanley Investment Management, where she worked for over a decade in sales, marketing, and business development and helped manage a $10 billion product line. So we have two very accomplished women joining us today, so will you join me as we welcome Judith first to the stage?
Thank you, David. As I listen to Lolita's, as Lolita's going to tell you, she keeps the Sabbath, and it's been an interesting journey, and I haven't heard it, so I'm looking forward to it. But when David was reading off all the things that she does, which are incredibly impressive, I thought she is living proof that you organize your time better if you keep the Sabbath, because it's unbelievable how many things she does and how important somebody who takes care of the climate in New York City is. So weirdly, I don't want to talk to you about religion. I don't think I say almost anything about religion in this little talk I'm about to give you. I want to talk about time. Because time is something we think of as just kind of there. And the main argument in my book is that no, time is actually a moral entity. It has a moral texture, it has moral effects and immoral effects. So first, I want to start by talking about how you spend your time. And I don't really know how you spend your time because I don't know you. So I'm going to talk about how the American Time Use Survey thinks you spend your time. Now that's something that's put out that answers to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. It goes around and makes people keep these meticulous time diaries, and it comes up with these averages. So here is how, according to the American Time Use Survey, Americans over the age of 15, use their time in 2015. This is what they did over the course of a day. They worked, if they work for pay, about 8 hours on a weekday and about 6 hours on a weekend day. Let's call you, because you're the average American for now. You work from home a whole lot more than you used to. If you're in management, you spend 38% of your work hours working from home. And that's interesting, because that's different. That's not the way it used to be. If you're a man, you spend 1 hour and 25 minutes on household chores. If you're a man in the suburbs, a lot of that is lawn care. Literally, I'm not making this up. You can go check the Bureau of Labor Statistics. It's right there. If you're a woman, you spend 2 hours and 15 minutes on housework, and that's mostly food prep, cleaning up, and laundry. If you're a parent, you spend about 2 hours on childcare if your children are under 6, and half that if they're older. Obviously, these figures vary really widely, depending on whether you're a man or a woman. You read for 19 minutes a day. You socialize or communicate with others for 41 minutes a day. Now, this is an interesting and weird fact. You spend 25 minutes online and 2 hours and 47 minutes watching TV. These results, I should say, are heavily skewed by people older than 75 who still watch a lot of TV. The younger you are, the more of that 3+ hours you spend online instead of watching TV, although you're probably watching TV online. And you're also, with younger people, it's harder to differentiate the socialization time and the online time, so that gets very complicated. We do know that Americans check their cell phones 47 times a day, which I'm sure you all think is a low number, 82 times a day if you're between 18 and 24, which I still think is a low number. So it sounds like we do a lot, and it sounds like we must be doing so much more than we used to, but we're not, actually. We're not doing much more than we used to. Apart from the part about working at home, which is different, it's even different from 10 years ago. It's gone up by like 6 or 7%, which is a lot in 10 years. And socializing electronically rather than in person, and the kind of screen we're interacting with, none of it has changed that much. We don't work longer than we used to, as some people claim. We actually do less housework, though we do more childcare. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. We have more leisure time than we used to. The amount of leisure time Americans have is actually expanding, not reducing. So why do we feel so busy and stressed? Well, let me propose a few reasons. First of all, you guys aren't the average American. If you break out white-collar workers from the general population, you find that they do not have more leisure. Their workday has stretched to 50 hours a week, which is, probably seems low to you, and that's because a lot of people are on the other end side of that average. Half of professionals report they work 65 hours a week. And it turns out the more you paid, the more you're likely to work, because your time is more valuable, and so your investment in working time pays off better. And also, we all know that, having really long hours, it's a status thing, right? Second, we parent more than we used to. Parents actually spend more time with their kids, parenting with an intensity never before seen in history, in terms of consumption and improving activities and things like that. And that is something that if you're the parents in this audience, because they're Manhattanites, probably do. I know I do. I'm a Manhattanite. It's called concerted cultivation, and it's bad for your kids. Don't do it, but we all do it anyway. And third, the reason go back to the question of why do you feel so busy and overstressed when you're not actually doing that much more than you used to, the answer is the quality and the texture of time has changed. And I'm going to get to the moral implications of that in a minute, but let me talk about how it has changed. I'm about to make some big assertions without backing it up with numbers. You can go on the US Bureau of Labor Statistics. You can look at my book, although that's 10 years out of date by now. There's all this stuff on this. You can look this all up. I'm not going to bore you with that. But here's the basic thing. The more productive we are as a society, and the richer we get, the more we have to cram into the same amount of time. There's more stuff to do. There are more apps. There are more leisure activities. There are more brand extensions to ponder in the grocery store. We buy more stuff. And everything we buy, literally economists measure this, it takes time to research it, buy it, read the instructions, set it up, make it work, take it to get fixed, and so on and so forth. Keep up with the ever-evolving product lines. So that's one thing. We do more. We consume more. We do more. Also, time itself has actually sped up. This is a perception we have. People have written books about how everything feels faster. No, everything actually is faster. Products are manufactured faster. Computers process faster. There's the Moore's Law. We eat faster. This has been measured. It has even been determined that we talk faster. Am I talking too fast, by the way? Because I probably am. We actually do. And of course, as we shift from text to emails, the pace at which we're expected to reply quickens. That's something that affects my life a lot lately. If we're exhausted, we take shorter power naps. This isn't just happening to us humans, by the way. Chickens lay eggs faster than they used to, because farmers have shortened the length of their days using artificial light. And I use that just as a metaphor for all the ways that we manipulate the processes of nature and have sped them up so they're more productive. Also, another thing that affects the way we perceive time, our schedules are no longer synchronized. There's some cheesy TV show, maybe someone knows what it is, I can't remember, it's from my distant childhood, where everyone used to say at a certain point in the show, synchronize your watches. Well, our watches are synchronized because they're all cellular, but our schedules are not. With globalization and the rise of the 24/7 economy, there's this increase in what's called non-standard work hours. You all know what that means. Mom and dad aren't home at the same time. Someone's dealing, on the time of the Japanese stock market. Someone's working, an early shift at something. Kids are doing after-school activities. Family dinner, forget that. There's no time for, it's not that there's no time for that. I'm sorry. There's no way to get that together. So even though we stay in constant contact via text and social media, we're actually alone more, or we feel alone more. And that tends to make us anxious. So that's how time, I think, has changed. Short overview. So where does the Sabbath fit in? It doesn't. That's the point. And that's the problem. It's an island in time, stranded by these stormy oceans of busyness. I see it as a hole in the shimmering webs that give our post-temporal society its brightness and its lightness and its instantaneous intimacy. The Sabbath forces us into a different space-time. That's why I called my book on the Sabbath A Different Order of Time. And what am I talking about when I talk about the Sabbath, right? I'm actually I tend to be talking about the Jewish Sabbath, which is a day when there are 39 kinds of work you're not supposed to do, which I will not go into. But I shouldn't be talking about the Jewish Sabbath because actually, in absolute numerical terms, hundreds of thousands and millions more Christians have kept the Sabbath than Jews, because there were hundreds, thousands of millions more Christians than there have been Jews. And this was a very Sabbatarian society at one time, but I'll get back to that. But because it's an island in time, because it's stranded, because not very many people in the wider society keep the Sabbath, it's at risk of disappearing. So I wrote my book not so much to say that we should bring back the Sabbath. That's going to be hard, though I'll suggest some ways to think about trying. But because I wanted everyone to appreciate the idea embodied in the Sabbath, which, as David quoted me saying, is one of the great inventions of Western civilization. It really is, like contract law and democracy. And it is not understood as such. Here's the genius of the Sabbath. Think about the fourth commandment. It says that everyone, you, your son, your daughter, your servants, the beasts in your field, which is really weird, and the stranger in your gate has the right not to work. As an aside, I will just point out, I wrote a separate essay on this. It does not mention your wife, because wives work on the Jewish Sabbath. They work very hard. Let's just set that aside for now. In the ancient world, this was just an inconceivably radical notion. Every single one of us, from the king to the slave to the ox in the field, has the right not to work. That alone, you don't have to say a whole day, just the right not to work. That's awesome. Moreover, the Sabbath says we have the right not to work at the same time that everyone else isn't working, so that we can do whatever it is we're doing when we're not working in the company of our loved ones. We get to not work together. And that should not be taken for granted. There was a period in the Soviet Union when they deliberately they got rid of Sunday and they shortened the week to 5 days, and they deliberately tried to break up families by putting mothers and fathers on different schedules. It is not to be taken for granted that you will have the right not to work together, and as I was just saying, with the desynchronization of schedules, it's not something to be taken for granted. So what does not working together do? It creates community. Not just a sense of community, but real community. There's a famous psychology experiment that I talk about in my book, and if you've read my book, I apologize for repeating myself, but it proves the link between what kind of time you live in, you experience, and what kind of community you're able to form. This experiment took place at the Princeton Theological Seminary, and it's called the Good Samaritan experiment because it consisted of future ministers being told they had to go somewhere and give a sermon on the Good Samaritan, right? So this is the story, the story in the Gospel is about a man in distress by the side of a road and the man who stops to help him, who is a Samaritan. So to go speak about stopping to help someone. Keep that in mind. In the experiment, 1/3 of the students were told they had to hurry because they were late already. 1/3 were told they were on time, they'd be on time, but they shouldn't dawdle. And 1/3 were told they had lots of time, not to worry. Then they went off. As they walked, I think one by one, I don't remember the setup. As they walked, each student passed a man slumped against a doorway in an alley, right? The man by the side of the road. And that, of course, was the real test. The man coughed, he groaned, he looked generally really sick. If the student stopped, he'd say in a sort of confused and groggy way, "He was fine, really. He just had a respiratory condition." If the student insisted on helping him, he'd ask to be taken to a building nearby. If the student did take him, he'd ask for water. This would drag out, etc. When the psychologists designed the experiment, they were actually what was known as doing personality psychology. They thought they were going to find out whether there were certain personality types that were more likely than others to stop and help people out. In fact, before they sent the students out, they subjected them to extensive personality testing. But when they measured the results, they found that personality type did not matter. Whether a student stopped turned out to be a function of how much of a hurry the student was in. As they wrote, and this was in '73 when things were a lot slower, ethics becomes a luxury as the speed of our daily lives increases. Don't be mad at the students, they told the readers. Many of them had said they hadn't even realized the guy needed help until after they'd rushed past him. To quote the great poet Paul Simon, they'd had eyes but could not see. The students who didn't stop, by the way, showed up for their talks all upset and anxious. They told the psychologists they had felt torn between their commitment to give a sermon and their duty to help a sick man. The psychologist wrote, "This is often true of people in a hurry. They hurry because somebody depends on their being somewhere. Conflict, not callousness, explains their failure to stop." The students did what they thought the psychologists wanted them to do, rather than the right thing to do. And these were seminary students. In fact, they were students at the seminary your minister went to, I learned just now, at Princeton Theological. So, given the ever more imperious demands upon us of a speeded up economy, how are the rest of us supposed to resist? How are we supposed to slow down? With great difficulty is the answer. But let me propose a thought experiment. Think of the Sabbath as a peculiar, non-electronic kind of social networking technology. It's a software, except that what it manipulates is not data, but humans, or rather human society, which, come to think of it, is also what most software manipulates. The first thing this Sabbath software does is limit work time. Beep, you've worked 6 days, can't work anymore, computer shuts itself off, that's it. There are actually programs like this, of course, as you know, because there are programs for everything. Second, the software shuts everything down at the same time, kind of like the malware that's out there. That sounds crazy, I know, that everybody would have to stop working at the same time. But remember that as little as a century ago, most people who stopped working at 5, and everything was closed on Sunday. Everyone not working at the same time solves that old desynchronization problem, therefore the isolation problem. And, now this gets us back to this question of the morality of time, it helps alleviate social inequality. If everybody, whatever they do, whether they're rich or poor or busy or underemployed, has to stop working at the same time, they are forced to deal with one another in real time, in person. They might even get to know one another. Third, the software ensures that the non-work period occurs not just at the same time for everyone, but at the same time every week, not just now and again. It becomes a habit. It creates a rhythm. So your society has a rhythm to it now, and everyone's swinging to the same beat. If you're just a little subculture in the wider society, say a church, then your rhythm sets you apart, gives you distinctiveness. Distinctiveness, of course, creates cohesion in a group. It creates a group. It sets you apart and it brings you together. And last, but definitely not least, in fact, I think this is the most important part of our Sabbath software, it programs in fun. Your non-work time doesn't all have to be downtime. It could be a party. At a minimum, it can be a Friday night meal with candles and wine and a nice roasted chicken, which is what it is for a lot of Jews. Or it could be a Sunday afternoon potluck with some damn good cornbread and lots of liquor. So how could you do this in your community? This is something David asked me to talk about. How do you do this if you don't happen to belong to a religion that puts the Sabbath at the very heart of its practice? It's worth keeping in mind that you belong to a religion that used to put Sabbath keeping front and center. In fact, the Sabbath has been so central for Christians at different periods and different epochs of Christian history that one small but very determined sect of Christians left behind everything they knew and got on some really creaky ships and sailed to America so that they could keep the Sabbath with the ferocity and the strictness they deemed necessary. And their idea of what a Sunday should look and feel like shaped American life for centuries. It's a little-known fact that what the Puritans were really mad at King James for was not enforcing Sunday laws. I mean, there was some persecution too. I won't talk about that. So I don't have any answers. I don't have an answer for you, David. I don't know exactly how you'd return to that time, and I don't know if you'd want to. I'm sure you don't want to return to that time. But here are a few things I do know after years of studying the Sabbath. If you want something like a Sabbath, and I mean, I don't even like the word. I hate the word. Let's talk about the software program. If you want something like that software program in your lives, you cannot do it alone. You have to do it as a group. In Judaism, we talk about having a Shabbos community, Shabbos being the Yiddish word or Hebrew word for Sabbath. You have to have one, otherwise it's horrible. Number two, you can't do it without food. Eating together, breaking bread, as the early Christians used to do, is the most unifying activity there is. 3, you can't do it now and again. You can't just show up and then not show up. It has to happen regularly or you don't get the benefits. And I'm not sure about this. This part is the most complicated part because, well, I'll explain why in a minute. I suspect you probably can't do it unless you do shut off your computer, your tablet, and your cell phone. I am not against electronics. I don't watch movies on Saturday, but boy, do I wish I could. I love electronics. I'm just against the ones on the Sabbath that take you away from the people you happen actually to be with and into a virtual space where you're cut off from them. If there was some way, if you're all watching the same movie together, great. In my household, everyone goes off into their separate rooms and watches their separate shows, so I can't even anymore say, it'd be great if you just, you watched a movie together, because that doesn't even happen. So those are just a few things, a few rules I would put out there for you if this is something you want to do. So that's my Sabbath talk, and I want to turn it over to Lolita, and then I can't wait to hear from all of you.